Richard Nixon was the 37th President of the United States and a member of the Republican Party. He was born January 9th, 1913. Prior to being president, he served in the U.S. Navy during World War II in the South Pacific, reaching the rank of commander and earning 2 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals. He was a U.S. House Rep from California's 12th District for 3 years. He was a U.S. Senator from California for 3 years. He was the 36th U.S. Vice President under President Eisenhower. In 1968, the election was the battle of the former vice presidents, or would have been if not for George Wallace. Nixon, the Republican candidate and former vice president under Eisenhower, ran against the, at that time, current VP, Hubert Humphrey, a Democrat. And American independent George Wallace made 3. Nixon won 32 states, while Humphrey only won 13. And the independent Wallace took 5. During this term, Nixon lifted sanctions on China and began trade business with them. He moved the U.S. towards a peaceful coexistence with the USSR in an attempt to end the Cold War. His support for Israel led to the Arab OPEC's spiteful refusal to sell crude oil to the U.S., resulting in the 1973 oil crisis. Nixon pushed to limit federal government as the Founding Fathers had intended. He passed the Clean Air Act of 1970 in an attempt to curtail air pollution. He created OSHA and passed the National Environmental Policy Act. He vetoed the Clean Water Act of 1972 due to its, as he saw it, excessive cost. He started the quote-unquote war on drugs. He pushed for more money for sickle cell research, also increased spending for cancer research, and spoke with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin during their walk on the moon. In 1972, Nixon ran against Democrat George McGovern and Libertarian John Hospers. Nixon won in a landslide, winning every state but Massachusetts. His second term saw the Watergate scandal, which led to impeachment proceedings. Nixon's Vice President Agnew resigned, and Nixon named House Minority Leader Gerald Ford as his new vice president. Though many today believe that Nixon could have weathered the impeachment without removal from office, as Johnson had done before him, and as Clinton and Trump would do after him, Nixon, at the time, was not willing to chance it, choosing to resign the presidency. To this day, he is the only president to do so. He is best known for being the only president to resign from the office. Little known fact, the 1972 election showed him to be, pre-scandal of course, one of the most popular presidents in history. His greatest accomplishment was his efforts to shrink federal power and control. His biggest failure was the removal of sanctions on China, which allowed the communist government to survive. His nickname was Tricky Dick. He was called that name by a Democrat ad in 1950, and it stuck. Richard Nixon died April 22nd, 1994, at the age of 81, of a cerebral edema brought on by a stroke on April 18th.